Do you struggle with anger? So whether it's conscious or unconscious, do you find anger to be an emotion that's really hard, really hard to deal with? Now, I don't know if you're like me, but anger for me emotionally is probably one of the worst feelings to experience. I do not like anger. It wipes out my system. It gets me sick sometimes. So how about you? Do you unconsciously or consciously struggle with anger? A lot of times it's unconscious. So you might be struggling with anger and it might be masquerading in another emotion like depression. So do you have depression or low energy or something else going on in your system, in your life? And have you ever thought that maybe that's anger underneath that? And that's just one of the emotions that we're going to explore shortly here. Now, could that depressed feeling or low energy or feeling stuck or in a loop, would that perhaps be, in fact, a byproduct of unintegrated or unprocessed or unfelt anger? Can you tell whether anger is guiding you to something very important that you need to shift, take action on, or assess, or not? Can your unexpressed and unprocessed anger make you also a magnetic match for other people in your life? Can your anger, if it's in the unconscious or if it's not fully felt through and integrated, can it actually draw to you relationships? What about the intuitive gifts of anger and boundaries? Have you ever considered that anger maybe just might be an intuitive sense, information, energy that's trying to tell you that you need boundaries where you don't have any right now? Can you look at your anger and take a minute and consider how it loops you? And if you could then lean into these intuitive gifts, could you get out of that loop? Well, listen, when it comes to anger, most of us actually opt out of feeling it at all. And that is something that this whole entire culture has put into play for us, because this culture basically has made dark emotions generally, especially anger, something that needs to be shamed, civilized, dealt with in a way where we just push it away, shove it down, instead of feeling what's really going on in our experience. And instead of listening to the intuitive guidance that anger is actually trying to give us. So how many times have you found yourself saying, I shouldn't feel this anger? If I were further evolved or more spiritual or more compassionate, I wouldn't be mad. This wouldn't upset me. If I had really done the inner work and healed my triggers, something we're going to explore, then I wouldn't get mad. Well, lacking a capacity to be directly in rapport with your experiences of getting angry or feeling anger and being conditional with your anger, that's actually part of the problem here. And I'm here tonight in this Friday Social Live to address just that. We're going to take a nice deep dive right into anger, but also anger as it contains intuitive gifts, especially when it comes to setting boundaries. So to be sure, anger is not fun. But if you consciously or unconsciously repress it, and as you'll learn in this Social Live, well, that can create enormous self-sabotage. I think self-sabotage you've never even considered. I think you likely have things in your life that are expressions of repressed anger or magnetics that are pulling in people because there's a magnet of anger that's not yet felt in your own system as a guiding force that's pulling them in. So if you know you are, or if you think you just might be having some trouble with anger, well, if it seems like you can't get out of a repeating loop with it, and also the repeating loops that come with all the repression of it and all the side expressions of that repressed anger, if you're in loops, you're in the right place, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this Friday Social Live. Stick around, because I've got your back as we look at, in fact, boundaries and the intuitive gifts of anger. so welcome to this Friday Social Live. As I record this and do this, it's actually what I call the old holidays. It's for me, Robert Ohato. It's by the way, I'm Robert Ohato. It's like the holidays and everything Ohato coming together for the old holidays. It's been a tradition for quite some time to call it that. So welcome to this Friday Social Live on anger, which just might be the perfect remedy for some of your old holidays challenges you might be going through. But even if you're catching this on demand some other time, this is it's an evergreen, relevant topic, issue, challenge that we all face. So I want to ask you some questions. As always, my goal is to land you in your own experience of what your system's doing, what your intuition's speaking through, and how it's trying to communicate with you. And that's usually done by just having you ask yourself some questions. So first question, I want you to evaluate this time we're doing a read on your anger. What I want you to evaluate that through is this question. How do you experience anger? How do you experience it? So if you were to take a minute and kind of consider historically and reflect back on times you've been upset, how anger hit your system, what your system did when you got angry, what you did in response to getting angry, kind of get a map of yourself online now. So for example, if you're someone who tries to, and this is something I think we all do because we're taught this, mentalize the anger. So instead of just being in the grit of feeling angry, we go to the mind. We try to hop up and rationalize it away or maybe justify it in some way and not really listen to its raw guidance, but put in some story on top of that. Or we just flat out decide, well, I'm just going to repress or suppress that, or maybe unconsciously, we just simply disassociate. I want you to think about the multiple ways, perhaps, you have handled anger in your life. What does that look like? What does it felt like? And maybe start to connect some dots and map a bit more, if you can, to where that went karmically. So if you repressed the anger, well, what happened long term, eventually, with that anger? If you rationalized it, if you mentalized it, then did it seem like it was always on your ass anyway? It's like I thought I had, moved through that anger or dealt with that anger. And then boom, someone maybe in your life that you have a relationship with or something triggers you. And it's like nothing got processed at all. In fact, maybe last time you got angry, it was level 5. Now you're level 8. So if you've gone to the head and tried to move through it in some way, track that, map that, then karmically what happened with that? Usually that can set us up for a re-triggering. And usually it comes through a relationship where we're, sort of contracted to learn a lesson about our empowerment and about how to listen to our own need for boundaries and our own worth and our own anger. So how do you experience anger? How have you experienced anger? And what do you most often do when you're in an experience of being angry or feeling anger? How about how you relate to the anger of other people? Have you found yourself historically shaming other people for being angry? Even if you weren't really consciously doing it, if we get honest, you were like snubbing your nose at someone who blew up and started yelling or going into a rage. How do you actually see angry people? Do you see them as being really messed up people, or do you see them as, okay, they're having an experience in their system. I wonder what's going on. Now, if we're in a relationship and we're shadow dancing with somebody, we're usually not asking that question that objectively, because if we're in the shadow dance with somebody and anger is part of the tango, well, we're usually in some sort of combat or trying to get a punch in or trying to get a slight in to one up the other in power. But I want you to just now begin without judgment, because this is the thing. If we really get honest, we judge anger. I certainly see judgments of anger circle around greatly in self-help and spirituality and religion and other areas where we're supposed to be good people. Wherever we find the message that we're supposed to be good people, and good is defined as being nice all the time, being compassionate, which is defined in a way where you don't have a full range of experience of dark emotions. But good is defined in a certain way that is really, if we're honest, based in perfectionism or based in an ideal, but not based in what we really experience. So we tend to be pretty shamey, blamey, scapegoaty, looking at people that get mad, and we do the same thing to ourselves. That's my point here. What you do to you, I can pretty much guarantee you're already sending energy out like that to other people when they get mad. How do you handle someone that brings their anger to you if you've made them mad? How have you in the past historically handled that? And it related with that. So we're mapping your anger. Now, one of the times where we can get a refresher of our anger can be when we're around family, because a lot of the triggers in us, right, were laid down in childhood and laid down in our formative years. So if you've recently had an experience like around the holidays or something where you've been around family and man, that brother, that sister, that mother, that father, that aunt, uncle, cousin, whoever it is, knows your buttons, knows your triggers, and they went in for the kill. Did you get angry? What did that feel like if you did? Did you try to tell yourself a story that you weren't mad when you were raging inside? This is the thing, once again, I'll say this again. I myself have trouble with anger. It's such an unpleasant emotion. Let's just be honest. It's not fun to feel it. It is so not fun. And for me personally, I don't know if there's anything else that zaps my whole system like anger. If I get mad, it's kind of game over for the day, or I've got to go take a nap, or I've got to somehow like completely shut my system, my mind down, and then kind of reboot it. So I don't know if you can relate to that. If you get angry and you're zapped, you're drained. But now let's start connecting dots to, what do you do with that anger? Does that anger give you any guidance? Have you ever thought of anger as one of your intuitive senses? Because I'm telling you it is. Have you ever thought of anger as a messenger? If I were to tell you, hey, one of the things we're going to talk about shortly, you do indeed have magnetics that match you up with people, and anger can be what generates magnetics sometimes. So who's in your life and why might have something to do with unintegrated anger, unprocessed anger, and most certainly a lack of boundaries. So when you look at that territory in yourself, when you look at that territory of how you relate in the world and how anger becomes a magnet. Let me be clear. Anger that isn't processed directly, felt directly, integrated, and also listened to for guidance becomes a magnet. Of the shadow dance variety, what do I mean by shadow dance? You go into your shadow self and your shadow archetypes or patterns, and the other person does as well, and you go at it. And everyone usually in a shadow dance has a role in the dance. Now, I'm going to get into a few threads there later, but I want you to understand that anger is powerful, but it's also beautiful in terms of it is such a beautiful guide. If you understand how to listen to it, and if you can actually go countercultural and be willing to be with your anger unconditionally. If you can say, look, I'm just going to be with my anger no matter what. This isn't about it being fun. You don't have to be with stuff doesn't mean we have to like it or it has to be fun. We can be with things that we don't like. That's actually what I would say real compassion is about, is being with something even when you don't like it, even when it is hard or it is challenging or triggering. So anger is one of those emotions that we reflexively try to get out of immediately. And we are, by our culture, shamed for being mad, shamed for using our voice, shamed for having any angry tone. Oh, you're not very centered. Why are you yelling? Shamed for yelling. Is there ever a time where yelling actually might be a good way to communicate with somebody? I'm going to say, yeah. Is it, fun? No. Would it be perhaps a little more smooth if you were able to speak to somebody in a different tone or a different volume? Maybe, but maybe not. See, what I'm doing is making space to be unconditional here. Because what do we do when we get mad? We may yell. We may be emphatic in what we say. We may actually come through different archetypes in us to set boundaries that aren't fun to be with or fun for people to relate to. But hey, this isn't about perfection. This is about authenticity. So, what is the role that your boundaries play with anger? Have you ever thought of this? Have you ever thought of anger as a voice in your intuitive system? And if so, well, do you listen? Why not? Does anger keep you stuck in repeating loops of self-sabotage? Yeah, totally. I'm going to call it an anger loop. So let's look first at the role that anger plays with boundaries. Now, I want you to think about any time recently or any time historically where you got really, really, really angry. And now I'm going to ask you, was there a boundary violation somewhere in the mix of that? What actually triggered the anger? Now, there may not have been actually. I'm going to get into some different triggering that centers around why we get angry. But for now, I want you just to reference, was there a boundary violation? One of the things I want you to consider in terms of what anger's role is when it comes to boundaries is that anger tells you often that someone's crossed a boundary. And usually it will come online when we aren't real proficient with knowing what our boundaries are or what our circumference is or what our needs are, so such that we leave our own boundary and go manage other people and we leave our center. So one of the things that is wired into each of us is that we are born with the right to have a centered sense of self. And when we violate that or someone else violates that, one of the messengers of that violation can be anger. So how would you ever get guidance on what to do about a boundary violation if you were someone who shamed anger or repressed it or disassociated away from it because it was too unpleasant, too uncivilized, and would make you seem like you weren't a good person? Well, what I just said right there is how a loop begins. A loop starts when we have something in motion, a pattern, such as a pattern on how we handle anger, and then nothing changes. So the pattern keeps propelling itself without intervention because nothing changes. We don't get to hear guidance from the anger loop because, well, we've got different things put in place that keep it moving and moving and moving. Maybe that's the role we play to a partner. Maybe that's the role we play in our job. Maybe that's the role we've always played since childhood because it was the role in childhood that got us to adulthood and helped us survive. Whatever it is, a loop begins. And let's just call it the anger loop. Now, in this loop, inherent in the loop is some sort of belief that to survive, you don't get to have boundaries. If you want to survive, you better not have boundaries. Now, take what I just said and go in. Is there somewhere in your life where you believe, and let me get a little riffy here, that if I have boundaries, people won't like me. If I have boundaries, people will abandon me. If I have boundaries, I'm going to get called a bitch. If I have boundaries, I'm going to get called, cold or cruel or selfish. Any of that in your psyche? Anything like that at all? Do you got any of that now connected to a loop and connected to your relationship magnetics, connected to how you move in co-creation every day? And then let's say eventually you start doing some inner work. You start realizing, I actually can take care of me. And if someone abandons me, I don't have to abandon me. I don't have to put all my survival on whether someone's here or not, or someone likes me or not, or someone approves of me or not. I can actually approve of me myself. I can actually parent myself. I can actually stop looking for mom or dad out there because I lacked or had inadequate ones when I was growing up that put into me this belief that I won't survive without approval, without someone liking me, I won't survive if I voice my anger. Now, see the loop? And it just keeps going and going. And then and everywhere on the loop, there's violation. There's hiding. There's lack of boundaries. I can't have boundaries to survive. And then you've got patterns in you, which I call archetypes, managing all that. And then next thing you know, you start to burn out. So yeah, let's talk about some of, let's say, the karmic possibilities that can come with mismanaged anger and an anger loop. Well, you could end up, as does happen sometimes, I know this happens to me, I just mentioned it, getting sick. I find that I am most prone, my immune system is most weakest when I do not process and handle anger directly and in a way that empowers my boundaries and empowers my sense of safety, security, and value. And also then can allow me to live in the world without some overwhelming fear of abandonment. I find that anger, if I don't express it, experience it, if I don't pay attention to when I'm being violated, how many times have you found yourself kind of half conscious of violations going on? You kind of know someone's violating you, but you're too busy, you're too stressed, it's too much to deal with. You don't want to say anything because then it's going to blow up and you're going to have to manage the blow up. You have to manage this relationship. You're going to have to manage your parents or your spouse, or you just like, I just would rather not do that. So I'm just going to keep going along with the flow, but you were violated. And you got a little pissed about it. Well, this loops, comes back around, and then 5 violations later, now you're in a rage. Now you are yelling. Maybe shaking the house, you're yelling so loud. Have you ever had that kind of experience? Or, no, Robert, I never got there. I just got depressed. I got low energy. I got to a place where I was just like, what's so great about this life? I got to this place where I just felt apathy and resentment. And then, I started to have health issues and I felt hopeless. I felt like I was taking a bath in toxic fear. I felt like I was stuck on repeat. So this is what I mean. There's a lot anger. Oof. If we do not directly meet and greet our anger and go, what's up? What do you got? What's the message? Bring it. I'm listening. We will pay a horrific self-sabotaging price. Whereas I'm offering here some guidance on, you could just meet and greet your anger, hang out with it, contain it, not act it out, or act it out, because maybe that's the smartest thing to do in that moment, the most, I think, affirmative thing to do. Now, having said that, I want you to feel yourself around things like the words aggression, self-assertion. If I say, how do you relate to aggression? What are your thoughts on aggression? What would you say? Would you say, I just see a place for it sometimes in my life. I got to be a bit aggressive. Or would you say, that's just a really dark thing, Robert? Well, if I said, well, what about healthy aggression, the kind of aggression that someone needs to be an athlete, to win at the Olympics, to push themselves further up a mountain climb? What about giving birth? That seems like there's, some real stuff going on that requires pushing, right? And now we can take aggression out of any just solely pejorative context and go, well, wait a minute, there are times when it could actually be useful. In fact, it may save your life. Self-assertion, asserting the self, essential self, and its needs. How are you with that? When we come into anger, we are in the masculine half of your psyche to some degree. That doesn't mean the feminine half of your psyche isn't going to generate anger, but what we do out of whether it's feminine or masculine will usually be masculine. Self-assertion is active. Aggression is active. Setting boundaries is active. So feel yourself so far in all I've mapped out. Where are you at? Have you ever listened to your anger? Have you had an experience where you actually did listen? It was an off day and you actually listened. And then you're like, whoa, this anger is telling me some information about a friend and maybe the backstabbing they're doing or the violations they're doing or the manipulation or passive aggressiveness that I've always been involved with them or this person or that person. Anger is going to tell you that person's violating you. And yet here's the thing. If we don't have an activated enough sense of worth, we may not even get mad. We may be so far down in esteem that we don't have enough of an esteemed self that can trigger into anger. So that then begs another view of self. Hey, are there times when I've just felt so bad about myself, I didn't feel like I had the worthiness enough to be angry, or as we might say, the right to be angry. And yet, something I discovered in readings, you get down further on and you start to get some esteem. And I coined this, I named this because I saw this phenomenon in people where you start to get some esteem, you're starting to feel good about you, and then suddenly out of nowhere, you're getting these flashes of rage and anger. Why? Maybe with people in your life, long-standing relationships, and the patterns that just now are starting to come back online and present themselves to you, and you can see them. Or you start doing a little bit of historical inventory of some of your sabotage and, but also of violations. And now guess what? You got enough esteem to be pissed. And suddenly you are frothing. And you come to me and you say, I am frothing, Robert. I am frothing at the mouth. And this is about something that happened when I was a kid 5 years ago, in my marriage 10 years ago. And I'm going to tell you, oh, that's post-esteem anger. That's the anger that you now can access that's coming online kind of in a time-warped way, because in present time right now, you actually have enough esteem to be pissed about what someone did to you when it comes to violations, etc., 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And let me tell you, that is brilliant guidance and intuitive information, because it's telling you you're starting to get some esteem enough to even be mad at all. Whereas 5 years ago, you didn't even get mad. There wasn't even enough of a self to have a boundary, or esteem of a self to have a boundary, to have any kind of anger triggering at all. So, anger. Now let's look at that's how it can work as a voice of your intuitive system or your emotional intuitive system. Let's look at anger loops, but let's also look at repression, disassociation, projection, and internalization. Now, repression to me is a little different than internalizing, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. But what I will tell you about everything I just mentioned, all of it comes with a nice bag of self-sabotage. So if you repress anger, which means to say you do sort of feel it, but some belief system in you, some shame-based usually belief system in you or thought system in you shoves it down. Or, like I said earlier, my life's too busy to deal with this right now, would probably blow something up. I don't want to deal with that. So I'm moving on. I'm just going to repress this. And it's like trying to shove magma back in a volcano that's getting ready to erupt. Eventually, that shit's going to erupt. So repression, disassociation, that's when you split from let me just be clear, split from your emotional system and all that it's feeling and relaying to you, and opt for maybe the mind or some ideal of self that isn't authentic, by the way, because it's not true to your experience of the anger you're feeling, and you just disassociate away. And usually disassociation can also involve projection, where we project anger onto other people. And we don't, all of a sudden we've got all these angry people around us. We don't understand why they're so angry when they're acting out what we can't. They're mirroring, they're matching what's unconscious in us. And that can happen. And that is not a fun, it's really not a fun journey. And usually that's where we get into some serious shadow dancing and brawls with people on the dance floor. I'm talking break dance, Beat Street, shake it up stuff where you're battling. That backspin is got knives in the feet and stuff. Now, if you internalize only, so you don't really disassociate. Repression is a little bit more like, I'm just going to put it off and put it away. Internalization can be this. I feel my anger, but I have such shame about it. So now I'm going to internalize it, and I'm going to take it in, and I'm going to make myself wrong for having that feeling at all. Repression doesn't necessarily mean you make yourself wrong. It's just rather, I can't deal with that right now. I'm just going to shove it down. Internalization is, I think, one of the more violent ways we deal with anger. And I sense intuitively one of the ways that it most hits your health, because there's a shame element in it where we internalize in and take the anger. And because we've had this experience of it, we're not going anywhere out there with it. We're pulling it into ourselves as if we just want to swallow some of our, some of our own poison. And we treat the anger as if it is poison, when it's actually guidance. It's actually an intuitive force. It's actually there because your holism has been violated. And it's saying you need to fight the good fight of holism here. That might be setting a boundary. That might be ending a relationship. That might be telling someone to F off. It could be a lot of stuff, but you won't know what it is if you can't be with your anger and hear what its message is in the first place. So any of these, repression, disassociation, and there's other ways we might handle anger. I'm not going to cover all of them, but these are some of the main ways that I've seen be very destructive, very self-sabotaging, and completely part of what propels a loop. Now, the other thing to remember here is that these things then create magnetics and draw people into us as a match. Now, anger and your magnetics with others, we're going to talk about that shortly. I'm going to take a little drink break, and then I'm going to talk about the sponsor for this Friday Social Live and just see who's in the house. So while I drink some double shot energy and ginger brew, it's a double shot energy ginger brew night. I want to tell you what the sponsor of this is. So what I'm talking about here is really a general way that we may deal with dark emotions overall, of which I would say anger for most of us is a dark emotion. And with that, what I mean by that, it's an emotion that is unpleasant, that usually comes from dark dynamics in our lives, meaning semi-conscious, unconscious things, things that carry lots of shame, guilt, things that carry a lot of trauma and history. So other dark emotions might be anxiety, feeling hopeless. We might consider grief a dark emotion. Go through anything that you, when you feel it, you're like, oh no, what drug can I take? Is there a drink around? So I did a course. You might be wondering, has he done a course on this? Absolutely, I have. And that is the sponsor of this. And it's called Evolve or Repeat. Now, this course is on my website, and it goes into not just the anger thread I'm here talking about here. It goes into all emotions, and in a much more fleshed out way over 3 lessons into a lot more depth around just the dynamics I've been mentioning here. Now, the cool news is that this course right now is actually on sale because we have kicked off the holidays on my website. So you save 40% off of all orders over $60, excluding the Your Intuitive Edge Inner Circle membership, which hasn't even opened yet, but will be opening very, very soon. Now, when you go to my website, you'll also find a landing page where you can look at other courses, and you'll see a list of them listed there, and courses that are coming up that are going to open, that only open once a year. But Evolve or Repeat is going to be something you might want to really check out if you're really feeling like, wow, this is the social life is really truly speaking to me, and I want to get in on that and go deeper and begin flushing out, what is going on in my life. Because the truth is, we just get into repeat here. We don't evolve. And anger as a guiding force, as any other dark emotion might be as well, it's urging us to evolve. It's saying evolve to where you are a person who owns their boundaries, owns their center, owns their worth. Now, how do you do that? Well, that's a lot of what that course gets into. But what I do want to kind of continue with as we go through a few more threads here is that the first thing I would offer, you have to be willing to feel the emotion. You will keep repeating until you stop and go, okay, this sucks, but I'm just going to be willing to feel my anger. And all right, if I said, are you willing to just unconditionally be with your anger? Consciously, you might go, I think I am. Unconsciously, now we get to see and observe when you get angry, what your system's going to want to do. And so when I say, be with your anger, feel your anger, what I'm also saying is observe yourself. So the next time you do get angry, I want you to watch what you do. What do you do? And this is observer mode first. Feeling mode, observer mode. I'm not going to do anything but just remember what Ohado said, which is hang out and be with it. That's it. That's the first step. That's the only step I want you to take. That's it. There's other steps ahead. But I will tell you that feeling the anger often can almost immediately, not always, and there's reasons why I'll explain in a minute, but can almost immediately guide you to the source of it. That source may be someone just, stepped on my foot. I'm being symbolic here, meaning, crossed a boundary. Somebody just lied to me and I just caught him in a lie. That's also a boundary violation. It's a violation of trust. Somebody is being passive aggressive. Somebody is being a gossip. Someone's being a bully. Okay, let's feel how we feel about that. And if you're angry, cool. What's that anger telling you to do? Well, I'll let you on a little bit here. I don't think it's telling you to repress the anger. I don't think it's telling you to ignore it. I don't think it's telling you to suck it up. I think it's telling you, listen, each of us spiritually, as humans, as souls in human journeys, have a contract to evolve into a conscious rapport with our own holism. And in that rapport, that means a conscious connection to our value, to our needs, to our independence, to our sovereignty. You are under soul contract, under a journey of destiny in which you are meant to evolve to be empowered in these ways. So if we take that thread back to, let's say, magnetics and matching, then we can look at our matches as teachers. Hey, you're teaching me something about my power. What is the messenger of the lesson? Anger. But if you don't let yourself feel the anger, be with the anger, you will not get that lesson. You will continue to repeat. You will loop, 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 loop. And as I do in my course, go through, with any emotion, similar loops. until you finally go, wait a minute, I'm just going to be with my dark emotions. And let me be clear, because this is going to be your default. I almost promise you, it's probably very unconscious, but you're going to go to your mind. You're going to feel anger and try to get to your head because it just feels so uncomfortable. Not only does it feel uncomfortable, what it might ask you to do will not be comfortable for you. Will push you out of some comfort zone. Anger is going, get out of your comfort zone of low worth, not having healthy boundaries, and not being willing to assert your space in this life. Not being willing to emanate your light in this life, which is exactly what you were born to do. So you're going to have, teachers that in shadow dance ways trigger you to get mad. And yay, you. This is an opportunity for you to go, okay, cool. A lesson's in play. A lesson of empowerment, a lesson of esteem, a lesson of self-love, a lesson of sovereignty, authenticity. A lesson is active right now. All right, anger, what you got? You're the messenger of the lesson. Give me the first shift. Give me the first boundary. Give me the first thing to say. And then you're going to go to your head again. Well, you better say it nice. Don't yell. I'm going to say, fuck that. Say it any way you can for now. Get your boundary. You can come back later. But if you go to your head and it starts to throttle the voice through some perfectionist filter of what you should say, how you should say something, you're going to stay in your loop. It's very likely you're just going to loop right back in. Maybe say half of what you really wanted to say. Now, hey, if out of the gate, you can take action, say what you need to say, set a boundary in ways that are direct and aren't, frothing at the mouth or, full of fire, great. If it's effective. But your energy's got to back up what you say. Oftentimes, by the time we do yell, by the time we do assert ourselves in ways that are a bit aggressive, it's because we've been pulling back this bow of a boundary, and the arrow's the boundary. And we just never really set it. We let it go and it comes out like a dart. But better it come out like a dart than not come out at all. And that's my point. I don't want you to bring perfectionism to your emotional system. I don't find that useful. There's a time when you get more skilled with being with dark emotions, especially anger, in which you can not rage through the process of setting a boundary or, telling someone your truth or whatever it might be for you. But that takes a little practice. You're going to be a little messy at first. So be messy. I'm not saying hurt anybody, for God's sakes. I'm not saying be violent about it. I'm saying, hey, get out of here. Stay in the emotion and see what it guides you to do. Ask it. Hey, let yourself feel it. Take some breaths. Embody it. I want you to take it everywhere beneath your head. You cannot go up there. Stay down here. Get in my feet. Get in my hands. Get in my belly. Get in my heart. Your anger, I don't want you up here. Stay down here. Let's get the energy, bodily, somatic senses, intuitive somatic senses alive, awake, and let's see what you got to tell me. Now, that is the best way I would say to feel through anger. I do think there's lots of wisdom in containment, but not in repression, not in disassociation, not in projection or internalization. I don't think those are wise moves with anger. It's going to backfire. And I know you already know what I'm talking about because you've already lived that. So can you feel through it? And anytime you start to feel it rising up and you just wanting to reach down with your mind and pull it up to the head. No. Maybe one thing to do is I'm going to give myself a day to let anger run through everywhere but my mind. let's see what happens. Treat it like an experiment if you have to. Now, what if you are not necessarily experiencing anger, but you are experiencing one of its repressed expressions, like depression or lethargy or apathy or feeling tired or feeling moody? What if the emotion you are most in touch with isn't the anger, but the side effect of its repression, which is another emotion or feeling? Well, you got to start where you are. So if you're dealing with a repressed or disassociated form of your anger or something that you've internalized, and it's sort of like birth these other emotional children that you're first dealing with, okay, we want to feel through those first. And we do the same approach. Hey, all right, depression. And by the way, let me be very clear. I am not speaking to clinical depression here. Now, I personally feel there can be connections between repressed anger and clinical depression, but that is something to work out with the therapist. I'm speaking to depressed states where you just feel like there might be some lead in your psyche and you just feel really, everything's kind of seen through a darker lens. Clinical depression is another ballgame in which there are brain chemistry dynamics in play that needs professional medical attention or someone who is a licensed clinical psychologist or psychiatrist. So let me be very clear about boundaries here. And that's where you may work with them, take whatever's useful from me, but also go to someone like that. Now, that said, what if you're also dealing with rage? Rage, which is, I often see as a white hot form of anger. It's gone like so, well, that to me is also a byproduct of anger that probably has not been listened to, felt through, integrated, and finally just comes out as a white burning flame or, nuclear explosion of anger. So whatever it is, and this is where and my course does this really well, go through some of your other feelings and see if they connect to anger. They may not. They may connect to other things, which is addressed in the course. But if it connects to anger, what you might realize is that, okay, beneath this rage is anger I never listened to. Oh, shit, I'm actually feeling post-esteem anger. Just what Ohado said. I'm mad about stuff that happened like 10 years ago. And I don't even get why, but I've been feeling better about myself. And suddenly now I'm mad. Yeah. So what do you do with that? Well, you acknowledge it's okay. I would say first thing, I want to high five you because that just is a sign, if you will, positive symptom that you're becoming empowered. You are starting to really feel you're enough and that you matter and that your boundaries matter. And you're just kind of going retroactive with that and getting mad about situations where you did not have enough empowerment to feel that way then. Okay, let's get you back here. And let's just appreciate, maybe you got to set some boundaries with people from back in the day that are still in your life. I mean, that's part of the post-esteem anger. They're still doing this, still doing the do. And you gotta jump in and get down to some business. Okay. Set some boundaries. Now, what I want to offer that you might explore and experience as you sift through anger, thread through emotions that might be masquerading and as other emotions, but really they're sourced from anger. You might find that ultimately, because I think this is some post-esteem anger we all might go through too, that when you get to the ultimate source of your anger, you're mad at yourself. I have seen, and I've certainly experienced this myself, people get very upset about not holding better boundaries or not saying things that they needed to say or not making certain decisions in their history because they did lack the empowerment. They did lack the consciousness. They did lack the awareness then. And then they're beating themselves up now because they didn't do something 5 years ago. Well, not real useful, very painful. And it's like post-esteem anger that you just, inflict on yourself. But it's still okay. If that's what you're experiencing, we want to love that. We want to hug that and go, oh, okay, well, let's just feel this through. You're mad at yourself because, and maybe now you're feeling the coward archetype in you come online because you're like, I was such a coward. Why didn't I say something back then? Why didn't I set a boundary back then? I've been in these loops for a decade or more. And look at the cost to what I could have done with my life, or what I could have done with my resources, or my energy, or my time, or what I could have created. Yeah, but you know what? Let's get real. If I took you back into your past and I said, okay, karmically speaking, I'm mapping you out. We're going to get real here. Could you really have done any better? Because you did not have the insights you have now. You did not have the shifts that had to lead you to these insights. You did not have the power or the worth or esteem online. So why get into this now punishing of self because you didn't do better then? First, it's okay you're doing that, but let's feel through it and let it go. Let's look at now. Let's look at where you got to shore up stuff now. Let's use that energy and channel to something positive, not repress it, not disassociate. We're going to accept that's how we're feeling. But we're going to also shift and go, okay, I feel this. I understand why. I'm just going to give that old me a big hug. And let's bring that energy into the moment and let it propel the new. Get out of the loop, because that's actually still part of the loop. Wouldn't like beating yourself up still be part of the same loop? Yeah. Let's do something radically different and decide I'm not going to beat myself up for it. I might still sputter with some anger here. I'll just hug myself and love myself no matter what, be with my anger no matter what. But I'm also not going to add fuel to the fire. I'm going to redirect the fire. I'm going to let it warm other things in my life. Let's get into a new groove. So you might be very surprised as you thread through some of your anger at what your real sources are for it. And you might, in some cases, wind up right at yourself. And that's okay. Now, coming back full circle before we begin to wrap this up and I take some questions, the role that your boundaries play with anger. Let's revisit this now that we've got some things mapped. Boundaries, I think, first of all, I want to say this about boundaries. I have a very different way of approaching boundaries than I think most teachers might offer. It comes from being an intuitive, having done readings, and just knowing how our systems operate intuitively. So what I'm a fan of isn't really formulaic approaches to boundaries. I think sometimes that works. It's the medicine that we need. So in other words, we need this kind of boundary with an addict. We need this kind of boundary with a vampire. We need this kind of boundary with a narcissist. We need this kind of boundary with our children so they can grow up and become adults. We need this kind of boundary with our parents so they can grow up and become adults. I mean, okay, we've got some formula in here. Cool. But I'm more a fan of intuitive boundaries, meaning I have to assess each situation, feel through it, give it a read to understand, think of it this way, what kind of sunscreen I'm going to need. Now, I've got people in my life that sometimes I can be like sunscreen 5 and it's a wonderful, I get a nice little bronzed vitamin D friendship tan and I love hanging out with them. But sometimes they have patterns that come online and that's when I got to slap on the SPF 100 and make sure that they're not able to access my field or my psyche or my resources and that I protect myself. But next week, I might be back to SPF 5. So intuitive boundaries to me require a little bit more of an intuitive understanding of how to read situations and people compassionately, but also discerningly, and how to stay awake in your relationships. You got to stay awake. So it's got to be like, okay, I know our archetypal match. I know some of our matches. I know why some of these vampires are in my life. I know why some of these narcissists are in my life. So, all right, I'm going to go forward and live my life and realize no one's perfect. We've all got rough edges. We've all got dysfunction, perhaps. We've all got, shadow archetypes and shadow dynamics. And yet we all, want to connect with each other in some way and love and experience life and relationships, intimacy. So this isn't a perfectionist way to be with boundaries. It's an intuitive way. Now, some people, frankly, are just so toxic. There's nothing to really read. Just get out of there. There's no SPF to put on. Leave the room. Check your magnetics. Why you keep drawing them back in. What's that about? But when it comes to boundaries and anger is going to get your backside. It's going to say, okay, you didn't read the situation right, or you didn't read it at all. And you're pissed because they once again, or for the first time, if it's someone new, someone's violated you. So anger is going to go, okay, what do you want to do about that? Do you want to repress this? Would you like to internalize it? Project it out? Disassociate? Would you like to use your addict just to numb it off the map? There are a lot of options here. Or would you like to let this fuel some considerations of how you need to set some boundaries with them? What are those boundaries? Are these going to be boundaries forever? Maybe not. Maybe. And get on it. Start feeling through what's going on here. Now, last tip. Anger is going to alert you to when boundaries are being violated. Yeah. But now I've got to thread this to triggering. And I'm going to tell you out of the gate, and I'm saying this as a gay man, I'm not a big fan of hyper PC trigger culture where we make safe spaces where no one ever gets triggered. Not my jam. I definitely think we should respect our landmines in each other and have an understanding and sensitivity and sensibility about that 100%. But triggering is actually not good or bad, in my view. I think triggering is how we grow. It's how we certainly become aware of our shadow side. It's one of the primary ways, actually, that we come to understand what's in our shadow. And it's also part of our anger's guidance system. So if we can't make a space called life where triggering can be okay, well, we're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities for inner and outer growth, connection with each other, coming to understand, how we can transform this into a kinder world that's accepting of everybody and cares about everybody's boundaries and everybody's value. I am so for that. I'm not so sure creating safe spaces and creating this world where we don't have to empower ourselves internally and we're out there managing it all. Not a fan. I think it's both and. So when I talk about triggering, I don't come from I'm never, I trigger my students and probably triggered you if you watch me regularly many times with the love in my heart, truly, because that's how we're going to grow. And I know that as a teacher. I know that as a human being. Triggering sucks. I also know that it is so not fun any more than anger is fun. But I'm offering you an opportunity to shift perspective about it and actually realize that you can, I'm not saying I have this down, but you can come to a place where you're so internally powerful and empowered that the only thing that triggers you is mystical triggering. And I'm going to have to explain what that is in a minute. So that said, what does triggering tell you? How would you want to use triggering as a door into anger's intuitive instruction for you? Because that's exactly what it is. It's the door, if you will. I don't know anyone, I'll have to think about this, but that just became angry without getting triggered there. Can you think of times in your life when you got really angry and did that just come out of nowhere, or did something trigger that? Or just suddenly feel angry? Now, some of you may be so empathic that you absorb the field around you. And if there's an angry energy in the air, you might feel that come into your own system and start feeling angry. Sure. But even that's going to trigger your system and sort of harmonize it to that frequency of anger. So, and by the way, that anger in the field is probably the result of a mass triggering of sorts or something. So I digress, but let me say this. Traumatic triggering and anger. Let's talk about this first. And this is just a little 101 because I've done a lot of teaching on these things in other courses in lots of depth, but I want to give you this thread around anger because I think you need to at least know it exists and kind of explore it a bit. Traumatic triggering comes from often our trauma in the past, ergo, why it's called traumatic triggering. And this is my language. And what happens is something in our present mimics or approximates or hits a past trauma, triggers some sort of thing in us that makes our psyche time warp back to where the trauma maybe first happened, and also often triggers us into a activating of archetypes in us that we had at that time. Most usually it's the child in us, right? And then it's our child's team of survival management that comes online. And now you've got, so for example, you're maybe the way you survived was by being invisible. So if someone triggers you in a traumatic way, well, part of what happens with you is you go invisible, you go silent, because that's how you survive as a kid. I say that's the invisible child. Maybe what comes online in you is the exact opposite of that to some degree. Maybe you were just this rebellious child. And so this rebel comes online, but it could also be a shadow rebel. A rebel not really anchored to a cause, not a conscious cause anyway. Maybe what comes online in you is your people pleaser, your codependent, your addict, your escapist. So our systems are all wired specifically in a certain way as per, in part, what we've experienced in our childhood and our history. But this isn't just about childhood. If I had a war veteran in here and talked about triggering with them, traumatic triggering, this could be trauma from the war. So it's not just specific, but most commonly, that's where we'll go with traumatic triggering is to traumas that are historical. Now, this may also anger you. And I think most certainly if you've done some inner work and some inner shifting and let's say hugging of dragons or confrontation of the historical villains and abusers of your life, traumatic triggering can also very much summon anger. But I want to make a note that the anger is about healing out of the past into present time. The traumatic triggering is about your history. It's super important to get. And technically speaking, that's how it operates. And I'm going to offer you a new perception. It's beautiful. Because what does it do? It gives us an opportunity to go back to our history and bring some love and try to get to the present. And sometimes we're going to be very messy, gritty, and angry. And if we can be with that anger, it'll say, hey, you need now to self-parent that inner child in a way where it gives up its current survival team and opts for the one you as an intuitive adult are now downloading for it. And traumatic triggering will give you that opportunity. If you don't let it activate your victim archetype, shadow victim most notably, so that you can stay in a victim loop and never get out of your history. But I want to make a note that anger is part of this. So if you get mad, be with the anger and maybe explore. Is this a traumatic? What just triggered me to be angry? Is this a traumatic trigger? And if it is, I really will discourage you judging it at all. I'm going to encourage you getting curious and bringing love to it. And I'm going to say soul prayer, bring light, and let's go back into your past and see where you're snagged, because you're looping from there. You're looping. Now, why I did this course Evolve or Repeat is because we've got teams of patterns in us, archetypes that are part of our looping, that keep us from evolving, because we don't have a real, let's say, psycho-spiritual, multisensory, psychological technology to maneuver out of that into a new evolution. We just repeat. And sometimes the repeat lessens, slows down, or kind of gets into a new groove, but there's still something that anchors it back to the past. Even though some of the loops found some new tracks, it just comes back to the past. Now, this is shiftable. You absolutely can change this. That's why I did the course Evolve or Repeat. I want to next offer another kind of triggering that actually isn't about your history, so that you can understand the difference and then maybe better hear the message of your anger. So I began to realize a few years ago, this is a newer insight, and it kind of came after I suppose after I stopped doing intuitive readings full-time with people. But I realized that it's not just traumatic triggering that we experience. We also may experience something that I call mystical triggering. Now, what that is, it also involves anger. Trust me. I know this. This is one of my best friends, especially these days. Mystical triggering is about seeing something in the world or in a situation in public or in a dynamic in your family or in a relationship you're in and getting pissed off about it, getting triggered. Now, I'm going to come back to a both and scenario, but for now, I'm going to go a little bit either or, just to make a point, and then the truth of it, there's a both and in here. But mystical triggering is this. Let's say you and I are at a dog park, and I love animals, you love animals, and we have our dogs there, and we're hanging out, and this person comes into the dog park with their dog, and the dog seems skittish. And you and I both kind of get a little bit of a vibe that maybe it's been abused. But while we're at the dog park, we actually witness this owner abuse the dog. And you and I both get triggered. I'm angry, you're angry, amongst other feelings, as we witness this abuse occurring. Now, is that abuse relative to something that happened to me in the past? Let's just say no, because I'm not a dog. I've never abused my dogs. You would say the same thing. And so it's a present moment trigger. Why are we mad? We're mad because we're watching this beautiful being that we already know's got trauma. We're watching this dog have its holism violated by a human in a way that is inflicting trauma, pain, and suffering. Now, I should hope that pisses you off. I really hope it does. And I'm going to tell you that anger is guiding too. It's going to guide you and me together to either confront the owner, call animal services, and have that dog taken away. You and I are either you and I are taking it home. That's how we roll. Or something. We're going to intervene. We're not going to sit well with our souls if we just let that go on. Now, that involves getting pretty pissed off. You can probably already say, I'm probably turning red on camera just thinking about it. You can take what I just said and transplant it to any other situation, and I'm going to still be in this territory of what I would say is mystical triggering. It is when you see another person, a child, a being, an animal, have its holism violated in a way that you get triggered into anger, and your anger recruits your advocate, your love rebel, something in you that's going to stand up for the holism of someone or something that can't. Now, we could go global here and go back in history. and talk about some of the world wars we've had and the triggering that came out of that, the anger that came out of Pearl Harbor for Americans when it was bombed, and how that was the trigger for the United States to get into World War II. And we'd be at the same place. This is about when we see someone's sovereignty, a being's sovereignty or holism being violated, and we give a damn. So this is now why I'm going to tell you, I am so not a fan of shaming anger. I'm so not a fan of treating it like it's something to be evolved past. I hope I never evolve past caring and giving a shit about other beings to the point where it can get me mad that something happens to them. I don't ever want to be numbed out like that or evolved. It's not my jam. I'm here to be a lover, an advocate, and a rebel for the freedom and sovereignty of other people and beings on the planet. Now, mystical triggering has instruction in it, and that instruction is go protect the holism of whatever is being violated somehow, whatever. And that's the thing. Every situation might be different, and you just got to trust you're going to know with your soul. This is a soul trigger. And what I want to say is it's present time. Now, there can be a both and. If I was in for example, let's say, I do come from an abusive background in my childhood. So if I was in a grocery store and saw a child being abused or shamed or called names by its parent, that would trigger both my mystical soul and perhaps my trauma from my childhood at the same time. Now, then I'm going to get instructions from both. And then you can get to a place with trauma, by the way, where you get a bit triggered, but you don't go all the way back into a loop in history. It's more like the scar kind of goes for a minute. And the mystical trigger is like, now do something. So, all right. So what I want you to do, closing this down, is just check out a lot of what I've offered here. Spend some time. And if you're in a cycle where you're around family or other people, or maybe this is really speaking to you about a situation presently, or, I would just offer this. I mean, aren't we all kind of in a collective cycle of sorts of watching wars in the world and violations happen of others' holism, whether it's a sovereign nation or someone or a group of people's rights or a group of people's equality based in whatever, gender, ethnicity, race, sexuality, whatever it might be. Aren't we kind of living this right now? I'd say we are. And I would say be with your anger about it. Be with it. Because it is perhaps the clearest voice you'll ever hear from your soul or from your own holism. And to make anger wrong or some dark thing to be shoved down or dumped in a trash bin, I don't think that's useful for our times. I don't think it's useful for your own holism. And I think eventually you might fall on that sword if you haven't already. So check it out and use it most notably to set some boundaries down. Ask yourself, your anger, what boundary do I need to set? What pattern am I in? And so here's the thing. This is why I did the course, because I could go on and on. You can't negotiate this with the mind. The mind is a patterned part of your consciousness. And inherent in it are filters from the patterns. So you've got to go to a different place in your psyche to negotiate a shift out of a loop, a deactivation of an archetype, an unmatching of an archetype with someone else, a way to deactivate a shadow dance dynamic. You don't do that with your mind. You will not do it with your mind. But if you can feel through emotions and get your anger and get in your body and let your intuition, which is not a mental force, it might speak through the mind sometimes, but it's not a mental force. Let that really start to speak. You can get guided out of your loops. You can evolve instead of repeat. So that said, don't forget, this Friday Social Live is sponsored by my course, Evolve or Repeat, The Power of Emotional Alchemy, that really goes deep into all sorts of dark emotions, including anger, and gives a real thorough way to get in there and do some shifting in alchemy. It's a video course, by the way, with audio download and PDF guides. And it's 40% off with the holiday sale up until the end of December. And yeah, you can go check out other courses that I've got going on the holiday sale. Some of them aren't released yet, but they're coming out throughout December. So stay tuned with that. And I'm just going to take a minute since this is a live and say hi and see if you guys have any questions. What's going on? Any questions? Should I caffeinate it so late? Yes, why not? Okay. I see Peggy Vogt aus Deutschland ist hier. Right. We've got Tony Brewer in the house. Cheyenne Crawford. Awesome. Nice to see all of you. Gail from Texas. Hey, Texas. Lori King, my Austin boo. Gee, what is going on? My astrology boo. So is Lori, by the way. All right. Kathy Chavez. Any questions? Anybody? You just like taking it in. Allison, hey, just saw you down in Santa Fe. Pamela Lond. All right. I see J.K. Jackson. Nice to see you. Janet, okay. I am dealing with a very similar issue with your brother. Stay strong. Okay, so you guys are talking to each other. Question. All right. All right, so I'm going to put this one up on the screen for a minute. Okay, because I think this might be something. And Rosina Pike, I love that question too. I wish I could put multiple questions up. So I guess I can start. Let's see what happens when I do that. Okay. Debbie asks, I too feel anger about the situations in the world a lot. How can you do anything in this? So I was just down in Santa Fe with Carolyn Mace, and those of you who were there got to witness this moment with her, which was a brilliant moment when we were doing a Q&A at the very end of our workshop. We did a 3-4 day-ish workshop together, and it was really great. But this woman asked basically a very similar question about her daughter who doesn't want to get a job. Her daughter doesn't want to get a job. She wants to go out and see all the animals before they go extinct and die because of climate change and all these things. And it was a really shocking question to kind of absorb, because there's a lot of truth in that question. Like, we are going to see probably the end of the polar bear in our lifetime. Some of us, we're going to see the end of certain animals. It's already happening. We're in a mass extinction event in the world because of the way the climate's changed. And not just that, I think, toxins and encroachment from humans on nature and all that kind of stuff. And I offered, hey, why don't you have your daughter go see the world, but at the same time, when she's going to see all these things that might, that are feeling so fragile and might not make it, do something. Well, Carolyn Mace, true to Carolyn Mace, came at it in a way that I think all of us were just like, and but it was still so brilliant, and I really felt it, and I felt her because I was right next to her. I could feel her truth in it. So I'm going to borrow from her a little bit in answering you and how you can do anything in this. We've got to go to a bigger perspective to get to a place where we can answer these questions for ourselves. What can I do in this world of all this, challenge and conspiracy and fighting false rebellions and false revolutions and getting dragged into the toxicity that exists often in social media and even, news media? How do we anchor in our power and, not just wake up every day pissed off? I mean, you could wake up and read every headline and get mad. Sometimes I do, and it's a great counterbalance to what I've also guided. And that's to say this: what I'd like you to consider as a perspective that I think can help you hear what to do for yourself better is the truth that you were born, I was born, we all were born for this time. When we were scripting our destinies, our fate to destiny journeys, we each knew this evolutionary challenge was part of it. We each knew that we were going to be born into a world that eventually would find itself at a crossroads of crisis, a world that was struggling in its beginning nascent stages of becoming a conscious one world. Now, I say conscious because we've always been one world. We just weren't conscious of it before. We had ships that could sail to other continents, or airplanes that could fly to other places, or, the internet. Now we know we are one world. We breathe one atmosphere. We have one climatical atmospheric process that each of us in some way are subject to to varying degrees. We have impact on ecological systems and ecosystem processes in everything we do, certainly when it comes to our energy and how we use energy on the planet. We know that now. So we each knew as well as souls coming in that we were coming down for this. So first thing that should do is neutralize any victim in you, any victim way of looking at this. And it should hopefully also activate a warrior in you that says, listen, I was born for this time, bring it on. What can I do? Where do I start? Now, a friend of mine that I haven't spoken to for quite some time, but he said something on a radio show that I did one time. His name is Andrew Harvey. And he's a sacred activist. He started this movement of sacred activism. And in this movement, I was interviewing him about it probably 13 years ago. And he said, Robert, if you want to know what to do, Debbie, if you want to know what to do when you get out of bed, what you're called to do, what you have a soul contract to do, look out at the world, open up your shades, stare out your window, look out at the world and ask, what's happening now that breaks my heart the most? And whatever that is for you, and it might be more than one thing, there's something in that you're meant to bring medicine to. We're not born to take it all on. I can't take on all the problems and ills of the world. There's no way. But I can teach you how to do that. I can do it in my own way that I feel called when I wake up and look at what breaks my heart the most in the world. I can go, oh, okay. And a lot of that comes from our own life experiences. I'm a gay man. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And when we had no one on our side, we didn't have any political party that cared about us. We didn't have anyone but us. So there's something in that breaks my heart that I'm motivated to teach and empower people through. It could be anything for you. I also, as you can tell, love animals. And one of the questions that I just saw there was about that. So what do? Well, I'm primarily vegetarian, and I also am very conscious, if I go off that, of how I eat when it comes to animals. I don't eat beef. I do what I feel for me makes an impact, and then I'm always asking, what else can I do? But I can't do it all. You can't do it all. But you were born to do something. So if you feel anger, Debbie, what are you most, so let me reframe it to this social life. What are you most angry about? Most angry. I mean, we can be hierarchical here. We're not taking on every battle. And start there. And then you pray. If you're lost, do you think heaven ain't answering in that soul prayer when you say, how can I best have impact, bring holism and healing to this world in this arena that I'm most angry about? You think you won't get an answer? Hell yeah, you will. Once again, this is part of just being willing to hear intuition. Can you hear it? Why not? What would it ask of you? I had to transition my black lab this last July. And I had to go back with my new kittens to the same lovely veterinarian that helped me transition my lab. And I wanted to ask her, just because I was curious, I wanted to ask her as a veterinarian what it was, whether transitioning pets for her was the hardest part of being a veterinarian. And her answer shocked me, just absolutely shocked me. So I'm in there with my kittens. They're getting their annual checkup. And I said, is transitioning animals just really hard on you? Is it the thing that you just most hate thinking about doing? Or how do you relate to that part of your job, that part of your service, that part of your calling? And she said to me, she said, it's my favorite part. She said, it's my favorite part. You know why? And I'm like, why? She said, because what a gift we get to give these animals in transitioning them so peacefully back home. It's my favorite part of my job to be able to do that. Just blew me away. And I looked at her and I thought, of course, that's why you are you in this service you're in. Because that only you in the soul of what you do could answer it that way. I couldn't do that. But her answer of, it's the most beautiful gift I give these animals, is that journey home in the most peaceful way possible. Just gutted me, as you can tell, but blew me away. When you are looking at your anger in the bigger meta context here of these questions that we're looking at here, and that deal with, there's so much to be angry about. There is, and I'm not advocating for you just being an angry person in the world, angry every day you wake up by every triggering headline, mystically triggering headline. Rather, find something like that vet where what you do feels like grace flows through you. Like you just become a channel of something most other folks don't have the cables for, the bandwidth for, but you do. That veterinarian does something I could never do. As a profession, I couldn't do that. It would be too hard for me. I'd be bawling my eyes out. The owners would be like, are you okay? Be a hot mess. But she, in her grace, man. So your anger can take you to that. And conversely, you don't have to fight every battle. And you don't have to engage every violation, or it's the thing about destiny and the thing about our calling to serve each other. It's so organic. It's already in the room of your life. I promise. It's already ringing your phone. The calling's already calling, but do you pick it up? When it comes to, it's what our heartbreak's connected to. It might make us angry. Now track with me. Yeah, I ain't picking up that call because it's going to piss me off or break my heart, or both. So I'm going to go Netflix and chill while the world falls apart because you didn't answer the call you have an agreement to answer. And it doesn't have to be dark. It might be just truly making people happy, being a great, designer, interior designer. Maybe it's being an amazing landscaper. And then in some other way, you support other causes that are a bit more of a battle. That's what I do. I mean, sometimes my classroom is like being on the forefront with the sword, but I also support NRDC. I do some other things for, equality with LGBTQ community. I do a lot of other things and support other things that are part of my heartbreak and mystical triggering, but I also make time to Netflix and chill. Because if I light, we gotta stay lit up. We gotta stay in the light. My membership's opening, in the first season of this membership. It's been going for 2 years, but the first season, I'm calling it the season of light, because I realized we need to light up. We can't. It's so dark. We cannot let this world put our light out. We can't. We've got to be lit up. And sometimes anger can light you up, but so can fun, so can friends, and so can giving a shit. Both and all of the above. Great question. Wow. All right. Oh, awesome. So I'm going to go to the starred one. And I'm going to bring this up and kind of thread out. Rosina Pike, thank you. I'm glad I just figured out how I could do that. That's kind of fun. So just kind of finishing up on the same sentiment here. Constant anger about animal factory farms, what to do. Yeah, they're horrific. Horrific. Well, obviously, we can start educating people about them. I think the reason why they proliferate and continue is because people don't really understand what they are and that they exist. I think the more awareness we can bring gently to people about it, the better, and not like in some raging kind of way, but rather, oh my gosh, I used to get chicken from the grocery store too, but I stopped because I found out that there's this horrible process of how they're raised, and then share from there. I think when we come at it from our humanity, people are receptive more, and we can affect more change and get people to care. So at the same time, Rosina, I pray for those animals. I do not buy anything like that from any regular stores. I always go to either, because I have the option here in Colorado where I live, an actual farm, or ranchers, or a store where things are humanely, and I know vegans would say it's not humane, but humanely slaughtered and raised. So yeah, I feel you. I really do. And we do what we can, and just keep doing more as we can, and I think education a lot of times for some of these things is really key. Most people have no clue where their food comes from in any regard, let alone factory farms. So there's a lot to be said there. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me for this Friday Social Live. I will be live next Friday. I'm live all through December. I'm trusting my internet worked. I didn't get any other, like, your pixelating or crazy stuff. I am working out some internet issues, but I'm glad I was able to pull it off. And sorry for the delay for those of you who are waiting for the live. That's why I was making sure everything was ready to rock. I will see you next Friday. I'll be announcing the topic in the early part of the week. So get on my newsletter. Best way to do that. If you want to go check out the course Evolve or Repeat, there is a link in the video description. It's kind of down at the bottom. I'll move it up. You can also find a link to the old holiday sale there as well, where it'll take you to the landing page, and you can look over all these awesome courses that we put on sale only once a year at this price. And so I got a lot of great stuff there. Ascension is really cool. It's about climbing mountains, literally and metaphorically, in your life. But Evolve or Repeat, really, one of the things I would really recommend, if this really resonated for you, go get that course, check it out. And happy holidays. I will see you next Friday. And if you want to, please do this for me. Please like the like button on YouTube or Facebook. It'll just kind of reciprocate me a bit for hopefully giving you some great insight and guidance tonight. And it would really mean a lot. All right. I'll see you next Friday. Namaste.